Regulating your nervous system is the foundational step in healing from post-traumatic stress disorder because trauma is not just stored as a memory, it is stored as a physiological state. The body learns to remain on high alert even when no immediate danger is present. This means your heart rate, breathing patterns, muscle tension, and even hormone release are biased toward survival mode. If that baseline isn't addressed, higher-level cognitive strategies tend to be far less effective because the brain is still receiving signals that something is wrong. One of the most direct ways to influence this system is through your breath. Breathing is unique because it sits at the intersection of conscious and automatic control. You don't have to think about it for it to happen, but you can deliberately change it when needed. When you slow your breathing and extend your exhales, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for calming the body. This sends a bottom-up signal to the brain that the environment is safe enough to relax, even if only slightly at first. A particularly effective technique is the physiological sigh, which involves taking a deep inhale through the nose, followed by a second shorter inhale to fully expand the lungs, and then a long, slow exhale through the mouth. This pattern has been shown to rapidly reduce stress by offloading carbon dioxide and resetting the rhythm of breathing. Repeating this for just a few cycles can create a noticeable shift in how your body feels, especially during moments of acute anxiety or overwhelm. Over time, consistent practice of these breathing patterns can lower your baseline level of arousal. Instead of constantly operating at a heightened state of alertness, your nervous system begins to relearn what calm feels like. This is critical because PTSD often narrows your window of tolerance, meaning even small stressors can trigger intense reactions. Expanding that window allows you to respond more flexibly rather than reacting automatically. It's also important to understand that regulation doesn't mean forcing yourself to be calm. In fact, trying too hard to relax can sometimes backfire, especially if your system is highly sensitized. The goal is not immediate calm, but gradual shifts toward safety. Even small reductions in tension or anxiety are meaningful because they begin to retrain the underlying circuits. Incorporating this into daily life doesn't require long sessions. Brief, repeated practices throughout the day are often more effective. For example, taking 1 or 2 minutes every few hours to focus on slow breathing can accumulate into significant changes over time. Pairing this with moments when you already feel relatively safe can strengthen the association between calm states and conscious control. There's also a feedback loop involved. As your body becomes more regulated, your thoughts tend to become less catastrophic and more grounded. This makes it easier to engage in other healing practices like therapy or reflective work because you're no longer starting from a place of constant internal alarm. In this way, regulating the nervous system is not just a coping tool, it's a way of creating the internal conditions necessary for deeper recovery to take place. Revisiting the trauma in a controlled and intentional way is essential because the brain does not automatically update old fear memories on its own. When a traumatic event occurs, the memory is encoded with a strong emotional charge and often without a clear sense of time. This is why certain triggers, sounds, smells, images, or even internal thoughts can bring the experience back with the same intensity as if it's happening in the present moment. Avoidance might feel like relief in the short term, but it reinforces the brain's belief that the memory itself is dangerous. The process of healing involves creating a new relationship with that memory. Instead of pushing it away, the goal is to approach it gradually while maintaining a sense of safety in the present. This is what allows the brain to begin distinguishing between then and now. When done correctly, this doesn't re-traumatize you. It actually weakens the emotional charge tied to the memory over time. One of the key mechanisms behind this is something called memory reconsolidation. Each time you recall a memory, it becomes temporarily flexible before being stored again. If, during that window, you are able to experience the memory without the same level of fear or physiological activation, the brain can update it with new information. Essentially, it learns that the memory is no longer a threat. This process gradually reduces the intensity of flashbacks, nightmares, and emotional triggers. However, this only works if the exposure is controlled. Flooding yourself with the full intensity of the trauma without any regulation can reinforce the fear instead of reducing it. That's why structured approaches are so important. This might involve working with a therapist trained in methods like prolonged exposure or cognitive processing therapy, where the pace and depth of revisiting the trauma are carefully guided. The idea is to stay within a tolerable range, not completely overwhelmed, but not completely detached either. A critical component here is pairing the memory with a regulated body state. If your nervous system is calmer while recalling the event, the brain starts to associate that memory with less danger. Over repeated exposures, this weakens the original fear pathways. In contrast, if you only revisit the trauma when you are highly distressed, the brain continues to strengthen those same circuits. It's also important to include context when revisiting the experience. This means reminding yourself in real time that you are safe now, that the event has already happened, and that you have resources available to you in the present. This engages the prefrontal cortex, which helps regulate the amygdala and supports a more accurate interpretation of the situation. Writing about the experience, speaking it out loud, or even mentally walking through it in a structured way can all be effective forms of this process. The key is repetition, combined with safety. Each time the memory is revisited under these conditions, its grip on your nervous system loosens slightly. Over time, what was once overwhelming becomes more tolerable, and eventually it becomes something you can recall without being pulled back into the same emotional and restoring a sense of safety in your body through consistent routines is a critical part of healing because trauma disrupts predictability, and the brain depends heavily on patterns to determine whether it is safe or not. When your daily life becomes irregular, sleeping at different times, eating inconsistently, lacking structure, the nervous system has fewer signals to anchor itself. This uncertainty can keep the brain in a subtle but persistent state of vigilance, even if nothing overtly threatening is happening. The brain is constantly asking one core question: am I safe? It answers that question not just through conscious thought, but through patterns in your environment and behavior. When your day has some level of consistency, your brain starts to recognize familiar sequences. Waking up at a similar time, exposing yourself to natural light early in the day, eating meals at predictable intervals, and winding down in a consistent way at night all act as signals that the environment is stable. Stability, over time, translates into safety at a biological level. Sleep plays an especially important role in this process. Trauma often disrupts both the quantity and quality of sleep, particularly REM sleep, which is essential for processing emotional experiences. When sleep is inconsistent, the brain loses one of its primary opportunities to regulate itself. Establishing a regular sleep-wake schedule helps recalibrate your circadian rhythm, which in turn stabilizes hormone release, mood, and stress responses. Even if sleep doesn't improve immediately, maintaining the same schedule begins to train the system toward balance. Nutrition is another piece that is often overlooked but deeply connected. Blood sugar fluctuations can mimic or amplify anxiety symptoms, making the nervous system more reactive. Eating regularly and choosing foods that provide steady energy can reduce unnecessary physiological stress. This isn't about strict dieting, but about giving your body predictable fuel so it doesn't have to interpret internal fluctuations as potential threats. Daily structure doesn't have to be rigid or overwhelming. In fact, too much rigidity can create its own stress. The goal is gentle consistency. Simple anchors in your day, like a morning routine, a regular walk, or a consistent time to disconnect from screens, can create a framework that your brain begins to rely on. Over time, these repeated behaviors form a kind of internal rhythm that counteracts the chaos often associated with traumatic experiences. There's also a psychological effect that comes from routine. When you follow through on small, predictable actions, you build a sense of control. Trauma often involves a loss of control, so reintroducing it in manageable ways helps rebuild trust in yourself and your environment. Even small actions, done consistently, can shift how your brain perceives your ability to navigate the world. Importantly, these routines should be paired with environments that feel relatively safe. This could mean organizing your physical space, reducing unnecessary noise or overstimulation, or creating areas where you can relax without interruption. The external environment feeds directly into your internal state, and small adjustments can have a meaningful impact on how your nervous system responds. As these patterns become more ingrained, the brain starts to lower its baseline level of alertness. You may notice fewer sudden spikes in anxiety, a greater ability to recover from stress, and an increased sense of stability throughout the day. This doesn't happen all at once, but through repetition, the nervous system begins to relearn that not every moment requires defense. Using movement as a tool to discharge stress is essential because trauma often leaves the body in a state of incomplete action. During a threatening event, the nervous system prepares you to fight, flee, or freeze. If that response isn't fully carried out or resolved, the physiological activation can linger. This means elevated stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol remain in the system longer than they should, contributing to restlessness, anxiety, and a constant sense of unease. Movement provides a way for the body to complete that stress cycle. Rhythmic, repetitive activities such as walking, jogging, cycling, or even swimming can help regulate the nervous system by giving that built-up energy a structured outlet. These forms of movement are particularly effective because they engage both sides of the body in a coordinated way, which appears to support communication between brain hemispheres and promote a more balanced internal state. One of the key mechanisms involved is the reduction of excess stress hormones. Physical activity helps metabolize cortisol and adrenaline, bringing the body back toward baseline. But beyond that, it also increases the release of neurochemicals like endorphins and dopamine, which improve mood and create a sense of reward and relief. This isn't just about feeling better temporarily, it's about gradually shifting the body's default state away from chronic tension. The type of movement matters less than the consistency and the way it is performed. High-intensity workouts can be helpful for some people, but for those with PTSD, they can sometimes mimic the physiological state of stress if not approached carefully. Rhythmic, moderate-intensity movement tends to be more effective because it supports regulation rather than overstimulation. The goal is not to push your limits, but to create a steady, predictable pattern that your nervous system can adapt to. Attention during movement also plays an important role. When you focus on the sensations in your body, the rhythm of your kai lere, the feeling of your breath, the contact between your feet and the ground, you anchor yourself in the present moment. Trauma often pulls attention into the past, through intrusive memories, or into the future, through anticipation of danger. Movement combined with awareness helps bring your focus back to what is happening right now, which reinforces a sense of safety. There is also evidence that bilateral movement, where both sides of the body are engaged in an alternating pattern, can help process emotional experiences. This is similar to the mechanisms proposed in therapies like EMDR. Activities like walking naturally incorporate this left-right pattern, which may contribute to their calming and integrative effects. Importantly, movement can also rebuild trust in your body. After trauma, the body can feel unpredictable or even unsafe, especially if it reacts strongly to triggers. Engaging in regular physical activity allows you to experience your body in a different way, as something that can move, adapt, and support you. This shift in perception is a key part of recovery. Even short periods of movement can be effective if done regularly. A 10 to 20-minute walk each day, done with intention, can begin to change how your nervous system operates. Over time, this creates a more resilient baseline where stress still occurs but doesn't linger as long or feel as overwhelming. Leveraging social connection is a powerful component of healing because human beings are biologically wired to regulate their nervous systems in relation to others. Trauma often disrupts this system by creating a sense that people are unsafe or unpredictable, which leads to withdrawal, isolation, or difficulty trusting. While that response can feel protective, it also removes one of the most effective ways the brain and body return to a state of safety. At a physiological level, positive social interaction directly influences key neurochemicals involved in stress and recovery. One of the most important is oxytocin, which is released during moments of trust, bonding, and connection. Oxytocin has the effect of reducing activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, while also lowering cortisol, the primary stress hormone. This creates a state where the body becomes more receptive to calm and less reactive to perceived danger. Even brief interactions can have measurable effects. A short conversation with someone you feel relatively safe around, eye contact, shared laughter, or even just being in the presence of others can begin to shift your internal state. These experiences provide real-time evidence to your nervous system that not all environments are threatening. Over time, repeated exposure to safe social moments helps recalibrate how the brain interprets human interaction. One important aspect is that the connection does not need to be intense or deeply emotional to be effective. In fact, for many people recovering from trauma, starting with low-pressure interactions is more sustainable. This could include casual conversations, spending time in shared spaces without the expectation of deep disclosure, or engaging in group activities where the focus is not solely on personal experience. These smaller steps reduce the risk of overwhelm while still activating the systems involved in social regulation. There is also a concept known as co-regulation, where the nervous system of one person influences another. Being around someone who is calm, grounded, and emotionally stable can help bring your own system into a similar state. This is not something you have to consciously think about. It happens automatically through tone of voice, facial expressions, and body language. Over time, these interactions teach your nervous system what calm feels like in a relational context. Trust, however, is rebuilt gradually. Trauma can create strong associations between closeness and danger, so pushing too quickly into vulnerability can backfire. It's more effective to allow trust to develop through consistency. When someone shows up reliably, behaves predictably, and respects boundaries, your brain begins to update its model of what relationships can be. This process takes time, but it is one of the most important ways to reverse the social withdrawal patterns that often accompany PTSD. It's also worth noting that connection doesn't have to be limited to close relationships. Interactions with acquaintances, support groups, or even structured environments like therapy can all contribute. The key factor is the presence of safety and mutual respect. Over time, these repeated experiences begin to reduce the intensity of social threat signals and increase your capacity to engage without becoming overwhelmed. As this capacity grows, social connection shifts from feeling draining or risky to becoming a source of stability and support, allowing the nervous system to spend more time in states associated. Being patient with the process is essential because healing from post-traumatic stress disorder involves changing deeply ingrained neural and physiological patterns that were built for survival. These patterns are not superficial habits. They are reinforced circuits in the brain and body that have been strengthened over time. Expecting them to shift quickly can lead to frustration and the false belief that something isn't working, when in reality the process is unfolding as it should. One of the most important things to understand is that healing is not linear. There are periods where symptoms seem to improve, less anxiety, fewer intrusive thoughts, better sleep, and then suddenly there may be a resurgence of old patterns. This can feel like a setback, but it is often a sign that the brain is reprocessing the trauma at a deeper level. As new layers are accessed, the nervous system may temporarily increase its activity before settling into a more regulated state. This fluctuation is tied to how the brain updates memory and threat responses. As you engage in practices like regulation, movement, or controlled exposure, you are essentially challenging old predictions your brain has made about danger. The brain doesn't immediately discard those predictions. It tests them repeatedly. During this testing phase, symptoms can intensify because the system is trying to determine whether the old response is still necessary. Over time, with consistent evidence of safety, those responses begin to weaken. Impatience can interfere with this process by adding another layer of stress. When you interpret temporary discomfort as failure, it activates the same threat systems you are trying to calm. This creates a feedback loop where the pressure to get better actually maintains the state of hypervigilance. Shifting the focus from immediate results to consistent practice helps break that cycle. The emphasis becomes less about eliminating symptoms and more about building capacity to handle them when they arise. It's also important to recognize that progress often happens in subtle ways before it becomes obvious. You might recover more quickly after being triggered, or notice that certain situations feel slightly less intense than before. These small changes reflect real shifts in the nervous system, even if they don't feel dramatic. Over time, these incremental improvements accumulate into more noticeable stability and resilience. Another key aspect of patience is allowing yourself to engage with the process at a manageable pace. Pushing too hard, whether through intense exposure, excessive self-analysis, or trying to overhaul your entire routine at once, can overwhelm the system and lead to burnout. Sustainable progress comes from working within your current capacity and gradually expanding it. This approach respects how the nervous system actually changes, rather than forcing it into rapid transformation. Self-observation without judgment also plays a role. Instead of reacting to symptoms with frustration or avoidance, noticing them with a degree of neutrality can reduce their intensity. This doesn't mean ignoring the difficulty, but rather recognizing that these responses are part of a system that is trying to protect you, even if it is no longer necessary in the present. Over time, this patient and consistent approach allows the brain to rewire itself in a stable way, creating changes that are not only meaningful but also lasting. Over time, this patient and consistent approach allows the brain to rewire itself in a stable way, creating changes that are not only meaningful but also lasting. What once felt overwhelming gradually becomes manageable, and the intensity of reactions begins to soften. The nervous system learns that it no longer needs to stay in a constant state of defense, and a greater sense of control starts to emerge. Healing in this sense is less about reaching a perfect state and more about restoring flexibility, the ability to move through different emotional and physiological states without getting stuck in them. As this flexibility grows, so does your capacity to engage with life more fully, with less fear and more presence.